May 17th, 2021, and this is DC Signal to Noise. And neither the Cubs or the Nats are close to the top of their division, so let's go ahead and move on from baseball already this morning. Jim Wiesemeyer, Pro Farmer Policy Analyst. How are you, buddy?
Pretty good. Beautiful day here in DC.
Absolutely. The bulls in the grain markets are going to see they're going to face several challenges this week, Jim. There's persistent chances for rain in the Midwest and in spring wheat country, buddy.
Yeah, and we had a big acreage estimate from IHS Market for corn, that is, but you're seeing other countries. You had that 1.7 million ton export to China for new crop announced by USDA today, and Mexico follow through for more sales. But as you said, we've got the rain coming through, and perhaps a significant increase in corn acres, from the intentions report. We'll have to see in June.
Yeah. By the way, Lance Honig, the chief of the crops branch of the National Ag Statistics Service, is going to be on AgriTalk tomorrow, talking about the survey work that they are going to be doing in June. It's not just that acreage report. We've got some cattle inventory data that's going to be collected. There's a lot of information that is collected in June, in the first part of June, that's going to be very important for ag and the markets going forward. So we'll have Lance on tomorrow to talk about some of the things that are happening there.
That's good to know.
Yeah. Hey, we need to look back at a couple of the things that happened last week, Jim, and really hone in on what the signal is that we receive from these happenings. And I still am not comfortable with what I know or what I don't know about the dealings with Liz Cheney. I mean, she was removed as the chair of the Republican caucus, but what does it really mean for the Republican Party?
Well, it means they remain split, and they've been divided ever since Trump, ran for president, Chip. You have the more populist, Republicans, the Trump supporters, to the more traditional, more conservative Republicans that Cheney espouses. And that's going to continue and actually increase. And some people see the elements of a third party, whatever you want to call it. There is a significant split in the Republican Party, and that's not going to go away because Trump keeps involved in the party. On the other side, Chip, Cheney, I think, is going to run for president in 2024. So I think she's using this as a platform as well. But she fervently believes in what she's saying, however, that she thinks the Republicans have lost their way.
Yeah. Real quickly on the 2024 election, for the first time, I've heard some people and some comments about Trump's age when it comes to running in 2024.
Yeah, the evangelist Graham mentioned that over the weekend, and of course he doesn't mention Biden's age, on that, which I thought was interesting. But I wish I just had half the energy of former President Trump. So that was an odd interview I saw, but they're mentioning his age. They don't want him to. Many people, I'm not saying Graham doesn't, but many people are going to throw up barriers, to Trump. Running, Chip, but that won't stop him.
Yeah. And when it comes to signs of age, can someone please get a message to President Biden to stop doing that little trot for like 2 or 3 steps before he gets to the podium? It makes you think that's all he can do. Okay.
He falls going up steps, as we saw in the plane. I mean, I did that in high school, but I wasn't normal. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think I have an idea.
I should have said college.
Yeah. Okay. Masks. I feel like AgriTalk in some ways has turned into the rural health channel over the past couple of weeks. We had Surgeon General Murthy on the show a couple of weeks ago. Last week, Dr. Marcella Nunez-Smith, who is a senior White House advisor to the COVID team there at the White House. She was on last week on Friday talking about the changes to the mask requirements or mandates. I hate calling it a mandate, but the requirements, the suggestions, whatever you want to call it, the protocol. When, masks for some reason became political during this whole thing, Jim, and I don't think that they're any less political today than they were last week.
No, it continues, but you saw now President Biden at 1 o'clock Eastern time today at the White House is going to update on COVID. And I know he's going to talk about mask policy, Chip, because they have befuddled this thing, CDC and the White House in the background. The White House said they did not know that the CDC was going to announce, what they did last week. I find that hard to believe.
Yeah.
So we're going to hear from Biden on this, and you have Trump involved in I don't know where he's doing it, but in a so-called tweet that he said he was right all along on mask, and Dr. Fauci was wrong. So the politics on this continues.
Absolutely, and I think it's going to continue. The questions that are still out there around the mask, okay, if you're fully vaccinated, you don't have to wear the mask, but how do we know who is fully vaccinated and who isn't? If you are fully vaccinated, should any of this even matter to you? And maybe most importantly, Jim, if you are fully vaccinated and you're still wearing a mask, why?
Yeah.
That one I don't get at all.
Well, and you're seeing the retail establishments. Walmart is soon you don't have to wear a mask. Their workers don't.
Right.
And soon the customers won't. I think they're going the right way here. I hope the supermarkets, start doing that, especially if you have both vaccines and the time frame within them. Your risk is quite low. So I think it's time on this one. But the politics of this one, Chip, I think what moved the CDC and the White House in the background on this is the schools. Now they're polling and they're seeing parents are more than upset about these schools not being totally open, not just 2 days a week, because that doesn't help the child care problem at all. So I think that's what really drove that mass debate inside the White House. That's the signal I'm getting.
That's the signal that we're looking for, Jim. That's it right there, because that makes all the sense in the world to me. I hadn't honestly given that a whole lot of thought, but it makes all the sense in the world to me, because we are seeing some major pushback in these viral videos from school board meetings that are taking place all over the country with parents that are flat out mad about how their child, their student has been treated through all of this. I attended a graduation ceremony yesterday, and some of the faculty that got up and spoke about how difficult it was for this class of 2021, high school class of 2021, to go through what they've been through in the last 2 years and to still meet all the requirements that it takes to graduate. There were some very experienced administrators on stage talking about it, high school administrators, but still very experienced. And to see them show the emotion that they showed, Jim, was really something to me.
Well, you're building the social fiber of your personalities in schools, and you didn't have that. And that's why it should not be surprising that we've seen emotional problems that dramatically increase. So it's ongoing.
That's good, Jim. That's the signal right there. Linking back to the schools and the push to get schools opened and back to normal for this fall, I think may have a lot to do with what's going on with this mask stuff.
Good. On this one, Chip, the vaccines for the younger children now are in place. So we've got the linkages ready to go for full opening in the fall for our school system, finally.
All right. Ransomware hackers, Jim, were paid off. We're paid off. We're getting the Colonial Pipeline supplies back to the East Coast, but I don't know what kind of a signal we're sending to the hackers if we're going to pay them off.
Well, it's the same signal that this country gave illegal immigrants from now 160 countries, Chip, to come to the Mexican border and come on in. It's just not Mexico and Central American companies anymore. But on the pipeline, there was a report over the weekend, a report on Colonial Pipeline several years ago that said an 8th grader could attack that system. So that shows you the inability of some in the private industry to get their act together. This is not a one-off event. And then all of a sudden now we have Friday, a bipartisan pipeline security bill in Congress. You think that, finally is happening on the time that pipelines are some of the newer pipelines, okay? The one that they shut down, XL Pipeline, was one of the most secure, all the new technology, okay? And they shut that down, and yet they let the other ones, and I'm not saying to stop them, go. It's just illogical.
So how did we pick Colonial as a winner over Keystone? Because Keystone is, how is it not as important as Colonial?
Regional, maybe, because the pipeline, Colonial supplies 45% of the East Coast, states. I'm not saying that's exact why, but I'll tell you. But it's that
refined fuel is made from the crude oil that flows through the Keystone.
Yeah, I know. The sensitive issue of driving this week, Saturday, I drove to 2 stations that were totally out here in Virginia. And then I saw a Target station that had only regular gas. Of course, I use regular gas. But the feeling you get when you're trying to find gas, it gets you more than upset and worried about the direction of the country.
Right. And then on top of it all, Jim, the shortage of truck drivers in this country and train truck drivers to haul fuel is pretty alarming as well.
It is. So this is going to have some additional days that lingering, because it takes I read that the oil goes 5 miles an hour, through the pipeline. So it's going to take it's going to take 5 to 7 days, but then you have to have the truckers. So we're seeing the dislocations in this country, and you're seeing it around. The linkages, like last week, Chip, we had inflation was the big story. It was the cover story in Barron's. It's going to be worse than you think. It's here now. And this is impacting the signals that the Federal Reserve is clearly getting. And the White House this is for real, and it could not be transitory, like you're saying. We saw that last week. We're seeing more evidence this week.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about inflation and the Fed meetings that are coming up this week here in just a little bit. This last one is a look back, but it is also going to lead us right into one of the major happenings for this week, and that is the fact that the Mississippi River has reopened to barge traffic, but the I-40 bridge remains closed. First, the signal from this event, Jim, as I see it, the inspector that discovered this broken beam called 911. That's how serious this was. Didn't just pick up the phone and call his superior and say, listen, I think we've got a problem on the I-40 bridge. Called 911 to stop traffic. It feels like that's how close we were to a disaster on this bridge. The signal that I'm taking from this is that, and maybe this is, this is pretty obvious, but it is time to quit talking and time to do something in a bipartisan fashion.
Yeah, this wasn't just a fracture. You've seen the pictures. It was a crack. Okay, it was a crack. And if there's one, there's usually 2. So we haven't even gone that approach yet. So it's going to be months before you see commercial traffic or any traffic cross that bridge, and rightfully so. This should be impetus going into the infrastructure debate. Now, last week we had several meetings at the White House with President Biden and his top officials, with both Democrats and Republicans. So at least they're talking. That's a good signal. The Republicans, as soon as today, could unveil their counter offer, Chip. So they're changing. So the White House can't say the Republicans are not, altering their initial offer. But the issue, the signals I'm getting is the biggest issue is the revenue or the pay-fors for some of this. The Republicans are insistent that they do not increase taxes in order to pay for infrastructure. They favor increasing user fees. They don't call them taxes, user fees. But the White House press secretary, Jan Psaki, said Friday, no, that would be the red line in the sand because that would affect people in the middle class, and Biden says that he does not want to increase their taxes. So there you are again, a stalemate.
Yeah, this how to pay for it and the price tag that is connected to it, Jim, is going to tell us a lot about how this Congress is going to be willing to spend for the rest of its time. Because if it goes with the big package, it's what, $4 trillion plus?
Yes, new spending on top of the $1.9 trillion we've already spent. So $6 trillion
total.
$6 billion.
Trillion.
Starts that trillion. It just adds up. It's since Biden's been in office, both spent and proposed spent $6 trillion. That's a chunk of change.
Yeah,
but here's your key. The Democrats know now, and this is a clear signal I'm getting, and hear me clearly. You're not going to see the tax increases that affect rural agriculture that the Democrats are proposing. Very low odds, Chip, because the number of Democrats had told the White House this stepped up basis, even if it's at death, it ain't going to fly. So they have to go back to the drawing board. That's what I'm hearing from both Republicans and Democrats in Congress.
Well, there was enough opposition to the plan from within the Democratic Party in the House alone that you really had to question if they were going to get serious about pushing it forward, because it seemed like there was just such low odds of passage. So that's great to hear.
Yeah,
great to hear, Jim.
Yeah, we'll have to see it play out, but that's the signal I'm getting loud and clear. The votes.
So how is it all going to be paid for?
They'll mask it or it won't be done. See, Biden, his issue was, you go back to the previous time Biden wanted to run for president, very similar approach. He wanted to go big, go fast, and that's what he's doing this time.
Yeah.
But now some other events have gotten in the way, several crises, the border crisis, the soon to be evidence, inflation rising. Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary under President Obama, is saying he's more nervous now than the warning he gave a few months ago. Then you have the Mideast conflict, that is further escalating, and a whole series of things between U.S., China and Australia, etc. This is not the time to go too big, too fast. You just can't. He made a valiant try, but I don't think the votes are there any longer, Chip.
Okay. All right. Staying on the infrastructure for a bit longer here, Jim, because Friday on the free for all with you, me, Sean Haney, Real Agriculture, and Tim Barak, farmer from Northeast Iowa. Tim gets on there and started complaining immediately that his internet had been down for the last couple of hours.
Yes.
And we got into what I felt was a really good conversation about whether or not broadband for rural areas should be included in this infrastructure package, or if it should be one of those things that is carved out and addressed on an individual basis. What's your thoughts?
The signal I'm getting, it will be part of the overall infrastructure bill. There's a pretty good New York Times story today about the rural sector wanting one major thing in the infrastructure bill: broadband. fast broadband. And that's going to get more than a few rural state member votes, Chip, both at the Senate level and the House level. So yes, and I think you will have an infrastructure bill. Maybe they'll mask it, the pay fors by throwing up the proposed $80 billion increase for the Internal Revenue Service to find $700 billion in tax cheats. That's a pure historical approach how Congress likes to mask things. So I think the elements are there for an eventual infrastructure package, including that big funding for broadband, because that's desperately needed in the rural countryside, as you know, Chip. Not just broadband, but fast broadband, because that'll help narrow the rural-urban divide, that be able to keep those young, adults in farm country. The healthcare system, it dramatically, it just makes so much sense.
There you go.
Education, rural, keeping the people in the rural states because they love it. But if they don't have the mechanisms, they'll leave.
Right. Now, here's the deal. I'm out here in the middle of the timber, and when they ran broadband fiber to my house in the fall of 2019, it absolutely changed my life. The other thing is, it's not just the young rural residents in rural America. It is as we were having the conversation on Friday, I got a note from Randy Ermacher out in Nebraska, South Central Nebraska, talking about all the information that they're trying to download from, that they collect during the day when they're in the field, and then trying to download it into the system or download upgrades to their system. It just takes so long that it's got to happen. It's absolutely.
This is why I told Tim that for his area, get a pilot project going to test different systems. I have great faith in the entrepreneurship of our great country. There's a way that can elevate the speed in rural countryside. You get an Elon Musk and others like him to focus on that, you'll have a solution. And the money's going to be there. That we've seen about every other day, money pouring through since the Obama administration. Again, I always say, I want an accounting of that money too, because I think certain states have diffused that a lot of that funding elsewhere. So it better go for the intended purpose.
Right. Okay. Looking at some of the comments that are coming in here, Jim, real quick. Gary is back. Gary Rasmussen. Good to see you back, Gary. If you are asked if you are vaccinated, does that violate HIPAA? I don't know.
I don't know.
Might be above our pay grade trying to figure that one out. Speaking of above your pay grade, how can President Biden get away with answering a question with saying, boy, I don't know, that's above my pay grade? Does he not know what his job is?
The buck stops with him, baby. The buck stops with him. And it's
above his pay grade?
Yeah. But people, when you look at his polls, though, Chip, the majority of Americans still like the president. And I'm glad for that.
Oh, yeah.
And he's into that 55 to 60% approval rating. Now we need to see some details of some of these things, and that's where you usually get the pressure. But the signal, and this is frustrating to the Republicans, they know it's much like trying to attack Reagan and trying to attack Obama. Their popularities were fairly significant.
Yes, yeah. It almost feels like the honeymoon is lasting more than 100 days with this administration, Jim.
Yes, it is.
It does.
Well, when you throw out as much money on funding, it doesn't make you a negative. And look, the child care payments are going to start pretty soon. They were out with that over the weekend, So no, you throw money at it and they are. So that's what we're seeing. But as far as the vaccine, that's a personal choice. I totally agree with that. Yeah. But the science clearly indicates that get those vaccine shots.
Okay. Will Rodriguez has got a question for us too. I don't know if I've seen a question from Will in the past, so it's good to see Will. How much in taxes is collected annually? I bet it's a sky high number. You know that number, Jim? I don't offhand.
No, I don't know the total number, but it is high. It is
Yeah.
high. And see, this is why certain states, now the courts ruled late last week that, remember, the Biden administration wanted to negate any state governor from using the funds that they got for COVID aid to reduce taxes. Well, the courts initially ruled here that that's unconstitutional. So that's a message loud and clear that states, you don't usurp the federal. Federal does not get involved in state tax issues.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So, but yeah, we've got more than enough revenue coming in from income to fund our government in a sensible way. But we're spending money like
Yeah.
a drunken sailor times what, three,
Oh,
so,
boy.
or more.
The whole submarine might just have unloaded, Jim.
Yeah. As I
Okay.
say in my speeches, when I first came to town, I wrote in
After
millions.
6 months at sea.
Then I wrote in billions, and now it's trillions.
Yeah.
And the market is starting to signal here they're getting nervous about all this spending at this particular time.
Yep. Hey, Elon Musk taught those dark side hackers a lesson, didn't he?
Yes.
Came out, put a couple of tweets out about Bitcoin that they got paid in, and it just crashed.
But it was 42,000 the last time I checked,
Yeah.
So. But then who's the guy, the owner of the Mavericks, basketball team in Texas? I can't think of his name.
Oh, geez. Cuban, Mark Cuban.
Mark Cuban, he and his son, probably through his son, invested in Dogcoin, and that's been a significant gain for him. So we have him getting involved in the thing. But I'll tell you, Chip, the millennials I've talked with over the last year or so, that's what got me interested in cryptocurrency. I won't just say Bitcoin, because they're saying they like that area because they don't like the stock market. They think that's not as fair, or it's an inside playing game, elitist, things like that. And once I saw that, I could see the trajectory, for the cryptocurrencies.
Okay. Boy, IHS Market put out some big economic growth numbers or anticipated economic growth numbers. As you've been hinting at several times today, Jim, this inflationary pressure, the Fed is going to have to consider it this week.
You would hope so. I want to see what they discuss at the FOMC minutes. So that's their inside thinking, Chip. But I think IHS Market was 10%. I think they went up to 10% for the second quarter. I'm getting more worried, however, Chip, from the economist I talked with for the third and fourth quarter, for some of the reasons that we've discussed: inflation, inability to find workers. Now, here's the signal I'm getting on that. We've got 13 more Republican-leaning states that have taken action to stop the $300 additional unemployment benefits. In a few months from now, we're going to have a test case, because now we're going to have data to compare, Chip, to see whether or not those states who stopped that $300 got lower unemployment and were able to find workers. So I think now we're going to have a real life test case, and I can't wait for it.
Well, the problem with that is in states like Montana and Iowa, not so much South Carolina, but Montana and Iowa, the unemployment rate was already so low.
3.8% in Montana.
Come again?
3.8% and going down. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a similar number in Iowa. I don't know exactly what it was, but so it's going to be hard to move that needle a lot. We need to watch some of the more populous states like South Carolina for that signal that you're talking about, Jim. But I do agree with you. Ambassador Tai has some important meetings this week.
Yes, she's in with the U.S., Mexico, Canada trade agreement officials. She was at 2 hearings last week, both in the House and Senate, and gave more general comments. They're reviewing the Trump trade policy, and so that means they're not going to get too aggressive in the short term. She was asked about the ag official at U.S. Trade Rep, Greg Dowd's replacement, if you will. And she said it was coming soon. Well, within half an hour, you saw the ag sector put out a letter urging the appointment of that position. But she mentioned dairy issues with Canada will be discussed at the Monday and Tuesday meetings this week. And she mentioned labor and environmental issues with Mexico. Those are all well known, but at least they're discussing. And I'm not too concerned that there's not an ag official yet at USTR, because Catherine Tai was very much involved in the writing of the U.S. Mexico-Canada trade agreement. Right. So she knows what she's doing.
Right. I would agree with that completely. Okay. We're basically out of time, Jim, but I've got to ask this question. With everything that is happening on the Gaza Strip between Palestine and Israel, things that are happening with Iran, Chinese issues, there are many out there that are quick to say that the world continues to test the Biden administration. Is that what's happening?
That's exactly what is happening. You're seeing it from the China, very aggressive in their verbiage, around the world, not just with us, Australia, etc. You're seeing the Mideast flare-ups, and Israel will not stop until they really diffuse the opportunity for their opponents to fire at them. And you talk about a system that's stopping 90% of the missiles coming in, to their country. That's a relatively secure, system on the defense side.
Okay, that's when Israel stops. When does Palestine stop?
If they don't, then you won't have Israel pull back. They just will not.
Well, Palestine stops when there is no Israel, right?
According to some, yeah. It's just, well, you're not going to see an end. That's called Mideast,
Yeah.
It's called the Mideast. Yet we live in a dangerous world, and you're seeing it in the cyber warfare, things like that. So we've got to stay united in this country. That's what's so disconcerting, that we're so at loggerheads between the political parties that we're not keeping our eye on the ball for some of these other issues that could really be dangerous.
Gotcha. Omar is out there listening today too. Hi, Omar. Thank you so much. We do need to stay tough on China, and I'll wrap it up with this and say thank you, Omar, for this one. Nice conversation today, fellas. Appreciate that big time. Guys, be safe this week. We will be back next Monday morning with DC Signal to Noise.